Question 1. Strategic planning requires a pharmaceutical company to consider its approach to intellectual property and regulatory exclusivities for a newly approved, life-saving medication. The company has invested heavily in research and development and seeks to recoup these costs while ensuring the drug's availability. What is the most ethically sound and strategically prudent approach to managing market exclusivity for this critical therapy? Option A. Focus solely on aggressive patent litigation to defend all existing exclusivities without considering patient access or public health implications. Option B. Implement minor product modifications solely to qualify for new patents and extend market exclusivity without significant therapeutic advancements. Option C. Sue all available patent extensions and regulatory exclusivities to maximize market protection, while simultaneously developing a tiered pricing strategy and engaging in discussions with public health organizations regarding access programs for underserved populations. Option D. Immediately relinquish all patent protection and regulatory exclusivities to ensure the broadest possible market access and affordability from the outset. The correct answer is C. Pursue all available patent extensions and regulatory exclusivities to maximize market protection, while simultaneously developing a tiered pricing strategy and engaging in discussions with public health organizations regarding access programs for underserved populations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in pharmaceutical product development where a company must balance the desire for market exclusivity with the ethical imperative to make life-saving treatments accessible. The pressure to recoup R&D investment is significant, but so is the responsibility to public health. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of intellectual property law, regulatory pathways, and ethical considerations, particularly concerning vulnerable populations or diseases with high unmet needs. The challenge lies in identifying the optimal strategy that is both legally sound and ethically defensible, avoiding actions that could be perceived as exploiting regulatory loopholes or hindering access to essential medicines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of all available intellectual property rights and regulatory exclusivities, coupled with a proactive strategy to engage with regulatory bodies and potentially public health organizations. This demonstrates a commitment to maximizing legitimate market protection while remaining open to discussions about access and affordability, especially if the drug addresses a critical public health need. This approach aligns with the principles of responsible innovation and corporate social responsibility, which are increasingly important in the pharmaceutical industry. It also anticipates potential regulatory scrutiny and public perception by prioritizing transparency and a willingness to collaborate. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely focus on aggressive patent litigation and the assertion of every conceivable regulatory exclusivity without considering the broader impact on patient access or public health. This could lead to accusations of anti-competitive behavior and may invite regulatory intervention or public backlash, potentially damaging the company's reputation and long-term market position. Ethically, it could be seen as prioritizing profit over patient well-being, especially if the drug is for a life-threatening condition with limited alternatives. Another incorrect approach would be to prematurely abandon patent protection or regulatory exclusivity in favor of immediate broad market access without a clear strategy for recouping R&D costs. While seemingly altruistic, this could undermine the incentive for future innovation, as companies might be less willing to invest in high-risk, high-reward research if they cannot secure a reasonable period of market exclusivity to recover their investments. This could have negative long-term consequences for the development of new treatments. A third incorrect approach would be to engage in evergreening strategies that are purely cosmetic and do not represent genuine innovation, solely to extend patent life. Such tactics are often viewed unfavorably by regulators and the public, and can lead to legal challenges and reputational damage. Ethically, it raises questions about the integrity of the innovation process and whether the company is truly focused on advancing medical science or merely on extending market monopolies. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a strategic framework that integrates legal, regulatory, ethical, and business considerations. This involves thorough due diligence on intellectual property and regulatory pathways, scenario planning for various market access outcomes, and proactive engagement with stakeholders. A key decision-making process involves weighing the potential benefits of extended exclusivity against the risks of regulatory challenges, reputational damage, and ethical criticism. Professionals should always strive for strategies that are not only legally compliant, but also demonstrate a commitment to public health and responsible corporate citizenship. Question 2. Examination of the data shows that preliminary results from a phase Roman II clinical trial for a new pharmaceutical product indicate a statistically significant improvement in patient outcomes. The R&D team is eager to share this positive development with the market to boost investor confidence. However, the full phase Roman III trial data is not yet available, and the product has not yet received regulatory approval from the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company regarding public disclosure of these preliminary trial results, considering U.S. federal securities laws and regulations? Option A. Issue a press release immediately highlighting the positive preliminary trial results, emphasizing the potential benefits for patients and the company's future prospects. Option B. Consult with the company's legal and regulatory affairs departments to review the preliminary data, assess its materiality, and determine the appropriate timing and content of any public disclosure in compliance with SEC regulations. Option C. Share the preliminary results directly with key institutional investors and financial analysts to provide them with an early understanding of the product's potential. Option D. Wait until the phase Roman III trial is completed and the product receives FDA approval before making any public statements about the trial results. The correct answer is A. Issue a press release immediately highlighting the positive preliminary trial results, emphasizing the potential benefits for patients and the company's future prospects. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to quickly disseminate potentially positive news about a new product and the regulatory obligation to ensure all public statements are accurate, complete, and not misleading. The pressure to generate excitement and investor confidence can lead to premature or unsubstantiated claims. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial interests with strict adherence to regulatory disclosure requirements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes compliance with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) regulations, specifically Rule 10b-5 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which prohibits fraudulent or misleading statements in connection with the purchase or sale of securities. By seeking legal and regulatory review before making any public announcement, the company ensures that all claims are substantiated, material information is disclosed, and the announcement does not create a false impression of the product's efficacy or market readiness. This proactive approach mitigates the risk of insider trading allegations, market manipulation, and significant reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves immediately releasing preliminary positive trial results without full verification and regulatory review would constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could be interpreted as a misleading statement under SEC rules, potentially leading to investigations, fines, and lawsuits. It also creates an unfair advantage for those who receive the information before the general public, potentially violating anti-fraud provisions. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively disclosing positive results to a select group of analysts or investors, is a clear violation of Regulation FD, fair disclosure, which mandates that material non-public information be disclosed broadly and simultaneously to all investors. This practice can lead to accusations of selective disclosure and insider trading. A third incorrect approach, delaying the announcement indefinitely due to minor, non-material issues, while seemingly cautious, could also be problematic if it unfairly suppresses information that the market might find relevant, though the primary risk in this scenario lies in premature or misleading disclosure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential regulatory implications of any proposed communication. This involves consulting with legal counsel and compliance departments early in the process. The framework should then assess the materiality of the information, the completeness of supporting data, and the potential for misinterpretation by the public. Finally, it requires a commitment to transparency and fairness in all communications, ensuring that disclosures are accurate, balanced, and made in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. Question 3. Performance analysis shows that a new Johnson & Johnson pharmaceutical product has demonstrated promising results in early-stage clinical trials, suggesting a significant improvement in patient outcomes compared to existing treatments. The marketing department is eager to highlight these potential benefits in promotional materials to gain a competitive edge. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for making claims about this product? Option A. Proceed with making strong, definitive claims about the product's superiority and significant improvement in patient outcomes, as indicated by the early-stage trial results, to capture market share quickly. Option B. Develop marketing materials that highlight the potential benefits based on the promising early-stage trial data, while clearly stating that these are preliminary findings and further research is ongoing. Option C. Focus marketing efforts on the unmet medical need and the general potential for innovation, without making specific claims about the product's efficacy or comparative benefits until full regulatory approval and extensive post-market data are available. Option D. Make claims based on the preliminary trial data, assuming that if competitors are making similar claims, it is acceptable under current market dynamics and regulatory oversight. The correct answer is B. Develop marketing materials that highlight the potential benefits based on the promising early-stage trial data, while clearly stating that these are preliminary findings and further research is ongoing. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret and apply complex regulatory guidance to a novel situation involving product development and marketing claims. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for innovation and market competitiveness with the absolute imperative to ensure all claims are substantiated and compliant with relevant regulations, particularly those governing pharmaceutical advertising and promotion. Misinterpretation or disregard for these regulations can lead to significant legal, financial, and reputational damage for Johnson & Johnson. Careful judgment is required to assess the level of evidence needed for each claim and to ensure transparency with healthcare professionals and consumers. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a proactive and rigorous process of evidence gathering and regulatory review before making public claims. This aligns with the core principles of pharmaceutical regulation, which prioritize patient safety and informed decision-making. Specifically in the U.S., regulations enforced by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, mandate that all advertising and promotional claims for drugs and medical devices must be truthful, not misleading, and adequately substantiated by scientific evidence. This approach ensures that claims are not only accurate but also supported by data that meets regulatory standards, thereby protecting public health and maintaining the integrity of the company's products and reputation. It reflects a commitment to ethical marketing and compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves making claims based on preliminary or anecdotal evidence. This is a direct violation of regulatory requirements. For instance, the FDA's regulations on advertising and promotion, e.g., 21 CFR Part 202, require that claims be supported by substantial evidence, which typically means well-controlled clinical trials. Anecdotal evidence or early-stage research, while potentially indicative, does not meet this threshold, and making claims based on it would be considered misleading and non-compliant. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on marketing team consensus or competitor claims as justification for product benefits. Regulatory bodies like the FDA and FTC do not recognize internal consensus or competitor actions as a substitute for independent scientific substantiation. Marketing teams may prioritize commercial success, and competitors may also be non-compliant. Basing claims on these factors would be a failure to conduct due diligence and would expose the company to regulatory action for making unsubstantiated claims. A third incorrect approach is to interpret regulatory guidelines in the most lenient way possible to maximize marketing impact, without a thorough understanding of the underlying intent and strict enforcement practices. Regulatory frameworks are designed to protect public health, and a best effort interpretation that pushes boundaries is often viewed as a deliberate attempt to circumvent compliance, leading to severe penalties. This demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a disregard for the ethical obligations inherent in the pharmaceutical industry. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct above all else. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding all applicable regulations and guidelines. 2. Establishing robust internal review processes involving legal, regulatory, medical, and marketing departments. 3. Requiring a high standard of scientific evidence for all claims, commensurate with the significance of the claim. 4. Seeking expert legal and regulatory counsel when in doubt. 5. Fostering a culture of compliance, where employees feel empowered to raise concerns without fear of reprisal. Question 4. Operational review demonstrates that a new, innovative medical device has been developed by Johnson & Johnson, and the sales team is eager to launch aggressive marketing campaigns to capture market share. The marketing department has drafted initial promotional materials that highlight the device's novel features and potential patient benefits. However, there is a concern that these materials may not fully articulate the potential risks or the specific patient populations for whom the device is indicated, as the focus has been on its groundbreaking nature. Considering the regulatory landscape in the United States governing the promotion of medical devices, which approach best ensures compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. Rely solely on the internal legal department's review of the promotional materials, assuming their general expertise in corporate law is sufficient to ensure compliance with all relevant FDA advertising and promotion regulations. Option B. Immediately halt all promotional activities and conduct a comprehensive review of all marketing materials against current FDA regulations and guidance for medical device promotion, ensuring all claims are scientifically substantiated, balanced with risk information, and clearly define the intended use and patient population. Option C. Focus the marketing campaign on the device's unique selling propositions and assume that healthcare professionals will independently seek out detailed information on risks and contraindications from other sources. Option D. Proceed with the marketing campaign as drafted, assuming that the innovative nature of the device implies its inherent safety and efficacy, and that detailed risk disclosures are secondary to highlighting its advancements. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the marketing campaign as drafted, assuming that the innovative nature of the device implies its inherent safety and efficacy, and that detailed risk disclosures are secondary to highlighting its advancements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the potential conflict between commercial objectives and regulatory compliance, specifically concerning the promotion of a new medical device. The pressure to achieve sales targets for a novel product can inadvertently lead to overstating benefits or downplaying risks, which directly contravenes regulatory requirements for accurate and balanced product information. The challenge lies in navigating this tension while upholding ethical standards and legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a thorough understanding and adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing medical device promotion within the United States, as dictated by the FDA. This involves ensuring all promotional materials are scientifically accurate, balanced, and do not make unsubstantiated claims. It requires a proactive engagement with regulatory guidelines, such as those outlined in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and associated FDA regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 202 for prescription drug advertising, which has analogous principles for medical devices. This approach prioritizes patient safety and informed decision-making by healthcare professionals and patients, which is the fundamental intent of regulatory oversight. It represents best professional practice because it aligns with the core principles of responsible product promotion and risk management mandated by law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing sales targets over regulatory scrutiny. This fails to acknowledge the legal and ethical imperative to provide truthful and non-misleading information. Such an approach risks violating FDA regulations concerning misbranding and false advertising, potentially leading to significant penalties, product recalls, and reputational damage. It demonstrates a disregard for patient safety and the integrity of the healthcare system. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because the device is innovative, its benefits are self-evident and require minimal explicit substantiation in promotional materials. This overlooks the regulatory requirement for clear, evidence-based claims. The FDA mandates that all promotional claims must be supported by adequate scientific evidence. Failing to provide this substantiation, even for a novel product, can lead to regulatory action for making unsubstantiated claims. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on internal legal review without consulting relevant FDA guidance documents or engaging with regulatory affairs specialists. While internal legal review is crucial, it may not always encompass the nuanced interpretation of specific FDA regulations and guidance pertaining to medical device promotion. This can lead to an incomplete understanding of compliance requirements, potentially resulting in promotional materials that, while legally reviewed, still fall short of full regulatory compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should adopt a risk-based, compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying all applicable regulations and guidance documents from the relevant regulatory body, in this case, the FDA. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of all promotional materials against these requirements, focusing on accuracy, balance, and substantiation of claims. 3. Seeking input from regulatory affairs experts and legal counsel specializing in medical device promotion. 4. Implementing a robust internal review and approval process for all promotional content before dissemination. 5. Prioritizing patient safety and informed decision-making above commercial pressures. Question 5. Analysis of the ethical and regulatory implications for a financial analyst who overhears a conversation between two executives from a competitor company discussing a significant, unannounced product development that could materially impact the competitor's stock price, and the analyst is considering whether to act on this information before it becomes public. Option A. Immediately purchase shares of the competitor company, as the information appears to be a significant market mover, and acting quickly provides a competitive advantage. Option B. Refrain from trading on the information and await public disclosure or confirmation through legitimate, publicly available channels before making any investment decisions. Option C. Attempt to discreetly contact other analysts or industry contacts to gauge their awareness of this development, potentially leading to a collective investment strategy. Option D. Dismiss the overheard conversation as speculative and irrelevant without further investigation, as it was not directly communicated to the analyst. The correct answer is A. Immediately purchase shares of the competitor company, as the information appears to be a significant market mover and acting quickly provides a competitive advantage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to secure a competitive advantage through early access to market intelligence and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to ensure fair and orderly markets. The pressure to act on non-public information, even if perceived as minor or preliminary, can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate market research and prohibited insider trading. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to the principle of information symmetry and avoiding any action that could be construed as trading on material non-public information. This aligns with the core tenets of securities regulation, such as the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 in the U.S., which prohibits fraud and manipulation in securities markets. Specifically, Rule 10b-5 makes it unlawful to employ any device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, to make any untrue statement of a material fact, or to omit to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements made, in light of the circumstances under which they were made, not misleading, or to engage in any act, practice, or course of business which operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon any person, in connection with the purchase or sale of any security. Acting on the overheard conversation, even if it seems insignificant, risks violating this rule if the information, when combined with other knowledge, becomes material. Best professional practice dictates waiting for public disclosure or confirming the information through legitimate, publicly available channels before making any investment decisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately purchasing shares based on the overheard conversation. This is a direct violation of insider trading regulations. The information, even if not fully formed or confirmed, could be deemed material if a reasonable investor would consider it important in making an investment decision. Acting on it before public dissemination constitutes trading on non-public information, leading to severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the information entirely without further investigation or consideration of its potential materiality. While the information might ultimately prove to be immaterial, a professional has a duty to exercise due diligence. Ignoring potentially market-moving information without a proper assessment could be seen as a failure to act prudently and could lead to missed opportunities or, in some contexts, a breach of fiduciary duty if the professional is acting on behalf of others. However, in the context of personal investment decisions, the primary risk is acting prematurely. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to verify the information through informal channels with individuals at the competitor company, who may also be in possession of non-public information. This could inadvertently lead to the spread of material non-public information and create a chain of potential insider trading violations, implicating multiple parties. It also blurs the line between legitimate research and prohibited information gathering. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the financial industry must cultivate a strong ethical compass and a deep understanding of regulatory frameworks. The decision-making process should involve a clear assessment of information. Is it public? Is it material? If the information is not public and could be considered material, the professional must refrain from trading or disseminating it. This involves a proactive approach to compliance, including regular training, establishing clear internal policies, and fostering a culture where ethical conduct is paramount. When in doubt, the safest and most compliant course of action is to err on the side of caution and avoid any action that could be perceived as a violation. Question 6. The performance metrics show a notable uptick in adverse event reports associated with a recently launched medical device, which closely follows the initiation of a new, aggressive marketing campaign. Considering the potential for both genuine safety concerns and increased reporting due to heightened awareness, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for the company? Option A. Focus on highlighting positive patient outcomes and testimonials from the marketing campaign in all communications, while deferring a detailed review of the adverse event reports. Option B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive, multidisciplinary investigation into the nature, severity, and potential causality of the reported adverse events, while simultaneously reviewing the marketing campaign's messaging and reach for any unintended influences on reporting. Option C. Attribute the increase in adverse event reports solely to the higher volume of device usage driven by the successful marketing campaign and continue with normal operations. Option D. Temporarily suspend all marketing activities for the device until the increased reporting trend can be fully analyzed and understood. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive, multidisciplinary investigation into the nature, severity, and potential causality of the reported adverse events, while simultaneously reviewing the marketing campaign's messaging and reach for any unintended influences on reporting. Explanation. The performance metrics show a significant increase in adverse event reporting for a new medical device, coinciding with a new marketing campaign. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's commercial interests with its paramount ethical and regulatory obligations to patient safety. A hasty decision to suppress or downplay the reported events could lead to severe patient harm and significant legal and reputational damage. Conversely, an overly alarmist reaction without proper investigation could unnecessarily disrupt product availability and impact patient care. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all reported events are thoroughly investigated, analyzed, and acted upon in accordance with regulatory requirements, while also maintaining transparency and ethical conduct. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves a systematic and evidence-based process of investigating the reported adverse events. This includes detailed data collection, root cause analysis, and a thorough assessment of the potential link between the device, the marketing campaign, and the reported events. This approach aligns with the principles of pharmacovigilance and medical device vigilance, which are mandated by regulatory bodies to ensure the ongoing safety of marketed products. By following established protocols for adverse event reporting and management, the company demonstrates its commitment to ethical conduct and its adherence to the regulatory framework designed to protect public health. This proactive and diligent approach minimizes risk and builds trust with regulatory authorities and the public. An incorrect approach that involves immediately halting all marketing activities without a thorough investigation is professionally unacceptable because it is an overreaction that could lead to unnecessary disruption of patient access to a potentially beneficial medical device. While patient safety is paramount, decisions must be based on evidence and a comprehensive risk assessment, not solely on an initial increase in reporting. This approach fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality in risk management. Another incorrect approach that involves dismissing the increased reporting as a result of increased product usage or the marketing campaign's success, without a detailed investigation into the nature and severity of the reported events, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a failure to adequately monitor product safety post-market and a potential violation of regulatory obligations to report and investigate adverse events. It demonstrates a disregard for potential patient harm and a prioritization of commercial interests over safety. This approach risks significant regulatory penalties and loss of public trust. A further incorrect approach that involves selectively reporting only positive feedback from the marketing campaign, while ignoring or downplaying the adverse event reports, is professionally unacceptable. This is a clear ethical and regulatory failure, representing a deliberate attempt to mislead stakeholders and regulatory bodies about the true safety profile of the device. Such an action would violate principles of transparency and integrity, leading to severe consequences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Acknowledge and document all incoming safety information promptly. 2. Initiate a thorough, unbiased investigation into any reported safety concerns, gathering all relevant data. 3. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment based on the investigation findings, considering the severity, frequency, and causality of the reported events. 4. Consult with relevant internal experts, e.g., medical affairs, regulatory affairs, quality assurance, and potentially external experts. 5. Determine appropriate actions based on the risk assessment, which may include further investigation, product modifications, updated labeling, or regulatory reporting. 6. Ensure all actions are compliant with applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. 7. Maintain clear and transparent communication with regulatory authorities and other relevant stakeholders. Question 7. The assessment process reveals a candidate's proposed plan for engaging with a group of physicians to discuss a new therapeutic option. The candidate suggests hosting a dinner event at a high-end restaurant, inviting key opinion leaders, and providing them with a modest honorarium for their participation, framed as compensation for their time and expertise in providing feedback on the product's potential market positioning. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory and ethical expectations for pharmaceutical company interactions with healthcare professionals? Option A. Host a dinner at an exclusive restaurant, offering a generous honorarium to physicians for their attendance and perceived insights into market trends, with minimal emphasis on formal scientific presentation. Option B. Organize a focused, scientifically driven educational seminar at a reputable medical facility, with a modest honorarium provided to speakers who deliver substantive scientific presentations, and ensure all meals are secondary to the educational content and within reasonable limits. Option C. Focus solely on promoting the new therapeutic option through marketing materials and sales representative visits, without any formal educational events or direct engagement with physicians beyond standard sales calls. Option D. Provide physicians with gift certificates for personal use, unrelated to any specific educational event, as a token of appreciation for their ongoing engagement with the company's products. Correct answer is B. Organize a focused, scientifically driven educational seminar at a reputable medical facility, with a modest honorarium provided to speakers who deliver substantive scientific presentations, and ensure all meals are secondary to the educational content and within reasonable limits. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a candidate's understanding of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance within the pharmaceutical industry, specifically concerning interactions with healthcare professionals. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the fine line between legitimate educational engagement and potential inducements that could influence prescribing practices. Johnson & Johnson, as a leading pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulations designed to maintain the integrity of medical decision-making and prevent conflicts of interest. The correct approach prioritizes transparency, adherence to established guidelines, and the genuine educational value of the interaction. This aligns with the principles of ethical marketing and compliance with regulations such as the U.S. Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FD&C Act, and the PHRMA Code on Interactions with Healthcare Professionals. These frameworks emphasize that interactions should primarily serve to educate healthcare professionals about products and their appropriate use, rather than to provide personal benefits that could sway professional judgment. By focusing on a scientifically relevant presentation and ensuring all expenses are reasonable and directly related to the educational purpose, the company upholds its commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that involves offering lavish entertainment or gifts, even if framed as a thank you, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such actions can be construed as inducements, violating the spirit and letter of regulations designed to prevent bribery and undue influence. This undermines patient trust and the integrity of the healthcare system. Another incorrect approach, such as providing substantial honoraria for minimal or no actual educational contribution, also creates a conflict of interest. This can lead to the perception that payment is for prescribing behavior rather than for genuine expertise, violating ethical standards and potentially contravening anti-kickback statutes. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on product promotion without providing balanced scientific information or acknowledging potential risks, is also problematic. This fails to meet the educational needs of healthcare professionals and can be seen as misleading, violating principles of responsible product communication. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations and company policies. They must then assess the proposed interaction against these guidelines, focusing on the intent, nature, and value of any exchange. Prioritizing transparency, ensuring genuine educational benefit, and maintaining proportionality in all interactions are key. When in doubt, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments is essential to ensure adherence to the highest ethical and regulatory standards. Question 8. Research into the development of a novel medical device intended for home use by patients with chronic conditions reveals promising early-stage efficacy data. The company is eager to expedite its market entry to capture a significant market share, considering the regulatory framework governing medical devices in the United States, which approach best balances innovation with patient safety and regulatory compliance. Option A. Seek expedited review by selectively submitting only the most favorable data to the FDA, while withholding any data that might suggest potential complications or limitations. Option B. Focus marketing efforts on highlighting the device's potential benefits, while deferring comprehensive clinical trials and detailed safety data submission to post-market surveillance. Option C. Proceed with marketing the device after obtaining preliminary positive feedback from a small group of healthcare providers, assuming the device's benefits outweigh potential, unquantified risks. Option D. Initiate the full FDA pre-market approval, PMA, or 510(k) clearance process, ensuring all required testing, documentation, and data submission are meticulously completed and reviewed before marketing. The correct answer is D. Initiate the full FDA pre-market approval, PMA, or 510(k) clearance process, ensuring all required testing, documentation, and data submission are meticulously completed and reviewed before marketing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to innovate and expand its product offerings and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect public health and ensure product safety. The need to balance commercial objectives with ethical responsibilities and legal compliance is paramount. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complex regulatory landscape, ensuring that all product development and marketing activities adhere to the established standards without compromising patient well-being or market integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and systematic evaluation of the proposed new product against all applicable U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) regulations. This includes rigorous preclinical and clinical testing, comprehensive data submission for review, and adherence to good manufacturing practices (GMP). This approach ensures that the product is not only effective, but also safe for its intended use, thereby upholding the company's ethical obligation to consumers and complying with the FDA's mandate to protect public health. It demonstrates a commitment to scientific integrity and regulatory diligence. An incorrect approach that involves fast-tracking the product to market based on preliminary positive results without completing the full regulatory approval process would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses critical safety and efficacy evaluations mandated by the FDA, potentially exposing patients to unknown risks and undermining public trust in the pharmaceutical industry. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively presenting data to regulatory bodies or downplaying potential side effects, constitutes a direct violation of FDA regulations regarding truthful and complete submissions and is ethically reprehensible, as it deceives both regulators and consumers. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on marketing and sales projections without adequate investment in the required regulatory compliance and testing, demonstrates a disregard for patient safety and legal obligations, prioritizing profit over public health. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant regulatory requirements. This involves consulting with legal and regulatory affairs experts, conducting thorough risk assessments, and developing a detailed plan for product development and submission that aligns with all FDA guidelines. The process should be iterative, with continuous evaluation of data and adherence to ethical principles at every stage, prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance over accelerated market entry is a cornerstone of responsible pharmaceutical development. Question 9. Governance review demonstrates that Johnson & Johnson's new medical device utilizes novel materials and an innovative delivery mechanism. While the product shows significant promise for improving patient outcomes, the development team is under pressure to accelerate its launch to capture market share. The review highlights a proposal to rely heavily on data from previously approved, but structurally different devices and to conduct post-market surveillance as the primary method for identifying any unforeseen safety concerns. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with U.S. regulatory frameworks, specifically the Food and Drug Administration (FDA) requirements for new medical devices? Option A. Defer extensive safety testing until after the product is launched, with a plan to address any identified problems through product modifications and regulatory submissions as needed, prioritizing immediate market entry. Option B. Conduct comprehensive pre-market clinical trials and rigorous validation studies specifically for the new device, demonstrating its safety and efficacy according to FDA guidelines, and integrate risk management throughout the development lifecycle. Option C. Proceed with the launch based on data from similar devices and focus resources on post-market surveillance to address any emerging issues, as this minimizes upfront development costs and speeds time to market. Option D. Interpret FDA guidelines in the most flexible manner possible, focusing only on the absolute minimum requirements to gain approval, and assume that post-market data will be sufficient to address any minor deviations. The correct answer is B. Conduct comprehensive pre-market clinical trials and rigorous validation studies specifically for the new device, demonstrating its safety and efficacy according to FDA guidelines, and integrate risk management throughout the development lifecycle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to innovate and bring new products to market quickly, and the absolute necessity of adhering to stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect public health. The pressure to meet market demands can create a temptation to bypass or expedite critical safety and efficacy testing, which is a significant ethical and regulatory risk. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with the non-negotiable mandate of patient safety and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented risk assessment process that integrates regulatory requirements from the outset of product development. This means proactively identifying potential risks associated with the new product's intended use, manufacturing process, and potential side effects, and then designing mitigation strategies that align with FDA regulations. This approach represents best professional practice because it embeds compliance and safety into the product lifecycle, minimizing the likelihood of post-market issues and regulatory enforcement actions. It demonstrates a commitment to the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, and good clinical practices, GCP, which are foundational to pharmaceutical regulation in the U.S. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to rely solely on historical data from similar, but not identical, products without conducting specific validation for the new product. This fails to meet the FDA's requirement for demonstrating the safety and efficacy of the *specific product being introduced. It represents a regulatory failure by not providing sufficient evidence to support the product's claims and could lead to product recalls or marketing restrictions. Ethically, it compromises patient safety by assuming equivalence where it has not been proven. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market by deferring comprehensive safety studies until after initial product launch, with the intention of addressing any issues that arise. This is a severe regulatory failure, as it violates the pre-market approval requirements mandated by the FDA. It is ethically reprehensible, as it knowingly exposes patients to potential harm without adequate prior investigation. A third incorrect approach would be to interpret regulatory guidelines in the most lenient way possible, focusing only on the minimum acceptable standards without considering best practices or potential future regulatory scrutiny. While technically not violating a specific rule, this approach demonstrates a lack of proactive compliance and a failure to uphold the spirit of the regulations, which is to ensure the highest standards of safety and efficacy. This can lead to increased regulatory oversight and a damaged company reputation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and risk-based approach to regulatory compliance. This involves establishing robust internal processes for identifying, assessing, and mitigating regulatory risks throughout the product lifecycle. When faced with competing priorities, the decision-making framework should always prioritize patient safety and regulatory adherence. This means engaging regulatory affairs experts early in the development process, conducting thorough due diligence, and maintaining transparent communication with regulatory bodies. The ultimate goal is to build a culture of compliance where ethical considerations and regulatory requirements are integrated into every business decision. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a significant breakthrough in a key product line has been achieved, potentially impacting future revenue projections substantially. The R&D team is eager to announce this development to the market, believing it will positively influence investor sentiment. However, the full financial implications and regulatory approval pathways are still being finalized. What is the most appropriate course of action for the company? Option A. Immediately issue a press release detailing the breakthrough, emphasizing its potential impact, while acknowledging that final financial and regulatory details are pending. Option B. Allow the R&D team to communicate the breakthrough directly to key industry analysts and investors to gauge initial reactions before a formal announcement. Option C. Delay any public announcement until all financial projections are finalized and all necessary regulatory approvals are secured, regardless of market pressure. Option D. Consult with the legal and compliance departments to determine the appropriate timing and content of any public disclosure, ensuring full compliance with all relevant securities regulations and internal policies. The correct answer is A. Immediately issue a press release detailing the breakthrough, emphasizing its potential impact, while acknowledging that final financial and regulatory details are pending. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for timely information dissemination with the imperative to ensure accuracy and compliance with regulatory disclosure requirements. The pressure to release information quickly, especially in a competitive market, can lead to shortcuts that compromise integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes accuracy and regulatory compliance above all else. By involving the legal and compliance departments, the company ensures that any public statement adheres to the strict disclosure rules governing publicly traded companies. This proactive engagement prevents potential violations of securities laws, which could result in significant fines, reputational damage, and legal action. It demonstrates a commitment to transparency and good corporate governance, which are foundational ethical principles. An incorrect approach that involves releasing preliminary, unverified information to the market would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could be construed as market manipulation or the dissemination of misleading information, violating securities regulations designed to protect investors. Another incorrect approach, such as withholding information indefinitely without a valid legal basis, could also be problematic, potentially leading to accusations of insider trading if certain individuals possess material non-public information. Furthermore, Failing to consult with legal and compliance teams before making any public statement is a direct breach of internal controls and regulatory expectations for due diligence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the materiality of the information. If the information is deemed material, the next step is to immediately engage the legal and compliance departments to assess disclosure obligations and ensure accuracy. This process should involve a thorough review of the information, verification of facts, and confirmation that all statements comply with relevant regulations. If there is any doubt, the default position should be to err on the side of caution and delay public disclosure until full compliance can be assured. Question 11. Which approach would be most appropriate for a healthcare professional at Johnson & Johnson when a patient reports a potential adverse drug reaction during a clinical trial, and the patient is hesitant to provide detailed personal information for the adverse event report due to privacy concerns? Option A. Submit an anonymized adverse event report with as much objective information as possible, omitting any details that could potentially identify the patient, even if it means the report is less comprehensive. Option B. Attempt to obtain informed consent from the patient to share relevant details for the adverse event report, explaining the importance of the information for patient safety and regulatory compliance, while assuring them of data protection measures. Option C. Proceed with submitting a detailed adverse event report using the patient's identifiable information without explicitly seeking their consent, assuming that participation in a clinical trial implies consent for such reporting. Option D. Advise the patient that detailed information is mandatory for reporting and that the adverse event cannot be formally documented or reported without their full cooperation, potentially delaying the reporting process. The correct answer is B. Attempt to obtain informed consent from the patient to share relevant details for the adverse event report, explaining the importance of the information for patient safety and regulatory compliance, while assuring them of data protection measures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain patient confidentiality and the regulatory requirement to report adverse events accurately and promptly. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential safety concern with the patient's right to privacy and the integrity of the data being collected. A healthcare professional must exercise careful judgment to ensure that all actions taken are compliant with privacy regulations and contribute to a robust pharmacovigilance system. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient consent and data privacy while still fulfilling the regulatory obligation to report. Obtaining consent before disclosing any identifiable patient information is a cornerstone of patient rights and is mandated by privacy laws. This approach ensures that the reporting process is conducted ethically and legally, fostering trust between patients and healthcare providers. It also allows for a more comprehensive understanding of the patient's experience and potential contributing factors, leading to a more accurate and useful adverse event report. An incorrect approach that involves reporting the adverse event without attempting to obtain patient consent for the disclosure of their information would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate patient privacy rights, potentially leading to legal repercussions and damage to the reputation of the healthcare professional and the institution. Another incorrect approach, such as withholding the adverse event report due to a lack of complete information, would be a failure to comply with pharmacovigilance regulations, which require timely reporting of suspected adverse events to ensure public safety. This inaction could delay critical safety assessments and potentially put other patients at risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of applicable privacy regulations, such as HIPAA in the U.S., if that were the specified jurisdiction, and pharmacovigilance guidelines. When faced with a potential adverse event, the professional should first assess the urgency and severity of the situation. If immediate action is required and patient consent cannot be obtained, reporting anonymized or de-identified data should be considered if permissible by regulations. However, the ideal scenario involves seeking informed consent from the patient to share relevant details for the purpose of the adverse event report. If consent is refused, the professional must then determine the extent to which the report can be made without compromising patient privacy, while still meeting regulatory reporting requirements. Documenting all steps taken, including attempts to obtain consent and the rationale for any disclosures is crucial for accountability. Question 12. The review process indicates that a new marketing campaign for a recently approved medical device is being developed. The marketing team has proposed several claims highlighting the device's efficacy, but the draft materials do not explicitly mention all the known potential side effects or contraindications as detailed in the approved product labeling. The Regulatory Affairs Department has raised concerns about the completeness of the information presented. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the company to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements? Option A. Proceed with the marketing campaign as planned, assuming that healthcare professionals are sufficiently knowledgeable to interpret the provided efficacy claims and seek out additional safety information if needed. Option B. Revise the marketing materials to include a comprehensive summary of all known side effects, contraindications, and a balanced presentation of efficacy and risk information, ensuring consistency with the approved product labeling and relevant promotional guidelines. Option C. Request an expedited review from the regulatory authority to approve the current draft of the marketing materials, arguing that the focus on benefits is crucial for market adoption. Option D. Focus the marketing materials solely on the device's most significant benefits and assume that detailed safety information will be provided separately during sales representative interactions. The correct answer is B. Revise the marketing materials to include a comprehensive summary of all known side effects, contraindications, and a balanced presentation of efficacy and risk information, ensuring consistency with the approved product labeling and relevant promotional guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to promote its products and the regulatory obligation to ensure that promotional materials are accurate, balanced, and do not mislead healthcare professionals or patients. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the specific regulations governing pharmaceutical promotion, which often require a nuanced understanding of what constitutes a fair and balanced presentation of information. Careful judgment is required to navigate the line between persuasive marketing and regulatory compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established regulatory framework. Specifically, it involves a thorough review of the promotional material against the approved product labeling and relevant guidelines from regulatory bodies. This ensures that all claims made are substantiated by evidence, that potential risks and side effects are adequately disclosed, and that the overall message is not misleading. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of regulatory action, reputational damage, and potential harm to patients. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the commercial success of the product without adequate regulatory scrutiny fails to uphold the principles of responsible pharmaceutical promotion. This could lead to the dissemination of unsubstantiated claims or the omission of critical safety information, thereby violating regulations designed to protect public health. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal opinions of key opinion leaders without rigorous scientific validation is also professionally unacceptable. Such practices can introduce bias and misinformation into the healthcare system. A further incorrect approach that attempts to circumvent or interpret regulations in a way that maximizes promotional impact at the expense of accuracy would constitute a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. This involves consulting relevant guidelines and seeking expert advice when necessary. The next step is to critically evaluate all promotional content against these standards, ensuring that claims are evidence-based and balanced. Finally, a robust internal review process involving legal, regulatory, and medical affairs departments should be in place to provide a final check before any material is disseminated. This systematic approach fosters a culture of compliance and ethical conduct. Question 13. The analysis reveals that a pharmaceutical company is developing a novel therapeutic agent and is eager to achieve market exclusivity by being the first to launch. The internal research team has identified some promising early-stage data, but concerns have been raised internally about the potential for certain adverse events that, while not statistically significant in the current limited dataset, could become more apparent in larger, longer-term studies. Management is pushing for an expedited submission to regulatory authorities, suggesting that the company can address any emerging issues through post-market surveillance. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the company to take, considering the regulatory framework for pharmaceutical product development? Option A. Submit the current data to regulatory authorities and request expedited review, highlighting the potential benefits of early market access while acknowledging the need for ongoing data collection. Option B. Proceed with the submission based on the available positive data, with a commitment to proactively monitor and report any adverse events identified during post-market surveillance. Option C. Focus the submission on the efficacy data and address any safety concerns raised by regulatory authorities during the review process, rather than proactively highlighting them in the initial submission. Option D. Conduct further clinical trials to gather more comprehensive data on both efficacy and safety, particularly focusing on the potential adverse events, before submitting to regulatory authorities. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the submission based on the available positive data, with a commitment to proactively monitor and report any adverse events identified during post-market surveillance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the potential conflict between a company's desire to innovate and the stringent regulatory requirements governing pharmaceutical product development and marketing. The pressure to be first to market with a novel therapy, while laudable from a business perspective, must be balanced against the paramount ethical and legal obligation to ensure patient safety and data integrity. The challenge lies in navigating the complex regulatory landscape without compromising scientific rigor or patient well-being. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to the established regulatory framework for clinical trials and data submission. This involves meticulously following good clinical practice, GCP guidelines, ensuring all data is collected, analyzed, and reported accurately and transparently. It also necessitates proactive engagement with regulatory bodies, seeking clarification and guidance throughout the development process. This approach represents best professional practice because it upholds the integrity of the scientific process, safeguards patient safety, and builds trust with regulatory authorities, ultimately leading to a more robust and approvable submission. It aligns with the core principles of pharmaceutical regulation, which are designed to protect public health. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves selectively presenting positive trial results while downplaying or omitting negative findings. This constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory violation, as it misrepresents the true efficacy and safety profile of the drug. Such an action undermines the scientific validity of the submission and deceives regulatory bodies, and consequently, the public. It violates principles of data integrity and honesty, which are fundamental to pharmaceutical regulation. Another incorrect approach is to accelerate the clinical trial process by reducing sample sizes or shortening observation periods without adequate scientific justification. This compromises the statistical power of the study and the ability to detect rare but serious adverse events. It is a direct contravention of regulatory guidelines that mandate robust evidence generation to support product approval, thereby jeopardizing patient safety. A third incorrect approach is to bypass or minimize the required post-market surveillance studies, assuming that initial trial data is sufficient. Regulatory bodies often require ongoing monitoring to identify long-term effects or unforeseen issues that may not be apparent in initial trials. Neglecting these requirements demonstrates a disregard for the ongoing commitment to patient safety and product stewardship, which is a critical component of pharmaceutical regulation. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the relevant regulatory requirements e.g. FDA regulations in the U.S., EMA guidelines in Europe, etc., depending on the jurisdiction. 2. Maintaining strict adherence to scientific methodology and data integrity throughout the research and development process. 3. Fostering open and transparent communication with regulatory agencies, seeking guidance when uncertainties arise. 4. Implementing robust internal review processes to ensure all data and submissions are accurate and complete. 5. Prioritizing patient safety and well-being as the ultimate objective. Question 14. The performance metrics show a slight shortfall in a key product's market penetration rate for the current quarter, potentially impacting year-end bonus calculations for the sales team. While the overall sales volume remains strong, the specific penetration metric is below the target. A senior sales manager suggests reclassifying a portion of new customer acquisition revenue from a different, higher-performing product line to the underperforming product line, arguing it reflects a broader market expansion effort. Option A. Reclassify the revenue as suggested by the senior sales manager to ensure the market penetration metric meets the target and positively impacts bonus calculations, as the overall sales volume is strong. Option B. Seek clarification on the definition and measurement of market penetration for the underperforming product. Consult internal accounting policies regarding revenue reclassification, and ensure any adjustments are fully documented, justifiable, and compliant with GAAP and SEC regulations before proceeding. Option C. Report the market penetration metric as is, but emphasize the strong overall sales volume in internal communications to mitigate concerns about the shortfall. Option D. Propose a one-time adjustment to the market penetration target for this quarter, citing unforeseen market conditions, to align with the actual performance without altering revenue figures. The correct answer is B. Seek clarification on the definition and measurement of market penetration for the underperforming product. Consult internal accounting policies regarding revenue reclassification, and ensure any adjustments are fully documented, justifiable, and compliant with GAAP and SEC regulations before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for timely and accurate financial reporting with the potential for misinterpretation or manipulation of performance data. The pressure to meet targets, especially in a publicly traded company like Johnson & Johnson, can create an environment where subtle adjustments to metrics might be considered, even if not overtly fraudulent. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all reporting adheres to the highest ethical standards and regulatory requirements, specifically those governed by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) and generally accepted accounting principles (GAAP). The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and accuracy in financial reporting, aligning with the core principles of SEC regulations and GAAP. By seeking clarification and ensuring that any adjustments are well documented, justifiable, and clearly communicated, the professional upholds their fiduciary duty to stakeholders and maintains the integrity of the company's financial statements. This proactive and ethical stance prevents potential misstatements and ensures compliance with disclosure requirements. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on achieving the target without proper justification or documentation would represent a failure to adhere to SEC Rule 10b-5, which prohibits fraudulent or misleading statements in connection with the purchase or sale of securities. This could involve misrepresenting the company's financial condition. Another incorrect approach that involves making subjective interpretations of performance metrics to favorably influence the outcome, without a clear basis in established accounting principles or company policy, would violate the principles of GAAP, specifically the concept of objectivity and verifiability. This could lead to financial statements that do not fairly present the company's financial position. A third incorrect approach that involves withholding information or downplaying negative aspects of performance to present a more favorable picture would be a breach of ethical conduct and potentially violate disclosure obligations under securities laws, leading to investor deception. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant accounting standards, GAAP, and regulatory requirements, SEC. When faced with ambiguous performance metrics, the first step is to seek clarification from appropriate internal sources, such as accounting policy experts or senior management, and to consult relevant documentation. If ambiguity persists, it is crucial to document the rationale for any interpretation or adjustment made, ensuring it is based on objective evidence and aligns with the spirit and letter of accounting principles. Transparency in reporting these metrics, including any significant judgments made, is paramount. If there is any doubt about the appropriateness of an approach, escalating the issue to internal audit, legal counsel, or a compliance officer is a critical step in ensuring ethical and regulatory compliance. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that expediting the launch of a new pharmaceutical product could significantly increase quarterly profits. However, during the final stages of clinical trials, some participants experienced unexpected adverse events that, while not statistically significant in the overall study, raise concerns about potential long-term side effects not yet fully understood. The regulatory submission package is nearing completion, but further investigation into these specific adverse events would likely delay the approval process by several months. Which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical professional conduct? Option A. Proceed with the current submission, highlighting the adverse events but arguing they are not statistically significant and do not warrant further investigation prior to approval, to capitalize on the immediate market opportunity. Option B. Focus on marketing the product's benefits aggressively to the medical community, downplaying the mention of the adverse events in the submission to ensure a swift approval and market entry. Option C. Submit the application with a note to the regulatory agency, suggesting that post-market surveillance will be sufficient to monitor for any potential long-term effects of the observed adverse events. Option D. Delay the submission and conduct additional, targeted studies to thoroughly investigate the nature and potential long-term implications of the observed adverse events, ensuring a complete understanding of the product's risk profile before seeking regulatory approval. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the current submission, highlighting the adverse events but arguing they are not statistically significant and do not warrant further investigation prior to approval, to capitalize on the immediate market opportunity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the potential benefits of a new product launch against the inherent risks and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet market demands and achieve financial targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all regulatory requirements are met before proceeding, even if it means delaying a profitable launch. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above short-term financial gains. Adhering to the established regulatory framework, such as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) guidelines for new drug applications, is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental ethical and legal obligation. This approach ensures that the product has undergone rigorous testing and evaluation to demonstrate its safety and efficacy, thereby protecting public health and maintaining the company's reputation and integrity. It reflects a commitment to responsible innovation and long-term sustainability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on expediting the launch, without fully addressing the identified safety concerns, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to the marketing of an unsafe or ineffective product, resulting in harm to patients, substantial financial penalties, product recalls, and severe damage to the company's brand and public trust. Another incorrect approach, such as selectively reporting only positive trial data while omitting or downplaying negative findings, constitutes scientific misconduct and violates the principles of transparency and honesty mandated by regulatory bodies. This undermines the integrity of the scientific process and deceives both regulators and the public. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. This framework should involve a comprehensive risk assessment, where potential risks are identified, evaluated, and mitigated. Open communication and collaboration among departments, including R&D, regulatory affairs, legal, and marketing, are crucial. When faced with conflicting priorities, the decision-making process should always default to the option that best upholds patient safety and regulatory compliance, even if it incurs short-term costs or delays. A robust internal review process, including independent ethical review boards where appropriate, can provide an additional layer of oversight. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that a new pharmaceutical product's final validation testing phase is encountering unexpected delays, potentially jeopardizing its planned market launch date. The project team is under significant pressure from senior management to meet the launch timeline, and some members are suggesting proceeding with the launch while completing the remaining validation steps post-market. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action from a regulatory and ethical perspective? Option A. Proceed with the market launch as planned, with a commitment to complete the outstanding validation steps in the shortest possible timeframe after launch. Option B. Expedite the launch by selectively skipping validation steps that are perceived as less critical, focusing only on those deemed essential for immediate product function. Option C. Advocate for delaying the market launch until all validation testing is successfully completed and documented, ensuring full compliance with regulatory requirements and patient safety. Option D. Present a revised timeline to senior management that highlights the risks of an early launch and proposes a realistic completion date for all validation activities. The correct answer is C. Advocate for delaying the market launch until all validation testing is successfully completed and documented, ensuring full compliance with regulatory requirements and patient safety. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining product quality and meeting aggressive market launch timelines. The pressure to be first to market can lead to shortcuts that compromise rigorous testing and validation, potentially impacting patient safety and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with ethical and regulatory obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory adherence above all else. By advocating for the necessary time to complete all validation steps, the individual upholds the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, and the regulatory requirements of the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in the United States. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and a thorough understanding of the potential consequences of releasing a product that has not been fully validated, which could lead to recalls, reputational damage, and severe penalties. An incorrect approach that proceeds with the launch without full validation fails to adhere to FDA regulations, specifically those concerning product quality and safety. This constitutes a significant ethical lapse, as it knowingly exposes patients to potential risks. Another incorrect approach, which involves selectively skipping certain validation steps deemed less critical, is also professionally unacceptable. This is a subjective judgment that can lead to unforeseen issues and violates the principle of comprehensive validation required by regulatory bodies. It also undermines the integrity of the entire quality system. A third incorrect approach, which attempts to downplay the significance of the validation findings to management, is disingenuous and fails to provide accurate information, hindering informed decision-making and potentially leading to a flawed business decision with serious repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of regulatory requirements and ethical principles. When faced with conflicting pressures, the first step is to clearly articulate the risks associated with any deviation from established procedures. This involves gathering objective data, consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations, and communicating these findings transparently to all stakeholders, including management. If necessary, escalating concerns through appropriate channels, such as quality assurance or legal departments, is crucial to ensure that decisions are made with a full awareness of the potential consequences. Prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance should always be the guiding principle. Question 17. Compliance review shows that a new Johnson & Johnson product utilizes patient data collected during clinical trials. The product team proposes to use this data for post-market surveillance and product improvement, stating the data will be anonymized. However, the proposed anonymization method has not been independently validated against current data privacy regulations, and there is a potential, albeit small, risk of re-identification if combined with other publicly available datasets. The product is on a tight launch schedule. What is the most appropriate course of action for the compliance department? Option A. Recommend a thorough, risk-based assessment of the proposed anonymization techniques against applicable data privacy regulations, involving legal and compliance experts, before proceeding with data utilization. Option B. Prove the use of the data based on the product team's assurance that it is anonymized, assuming that minor re-identification risks are acceptable for product improvement. Option C. Suggest that the marketing department take the lead in determining the acceptable level of data privacy risk, given their understanding of market needs and competitive pressures. Option D. Advise the product team to proceed with the launch as planned, with a commitment to review and potentially update the anonymization process after the product is in the market. The correct answer is A. Recommend a thorough, risk-based assessment of the proposed anonymization techniques against applicable data privacy regulations, involving legal and compliance experts, before proceeding with data utilization. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory compliance where a new product launch, driven by commercial pressures, potentially conflicts with established data privacy regulation. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely market entry with the imperative to protect sensitive patient data, especially when the proposed data handling methods are novel or not explicitly covered by existing guidelines. The ambiguity surrounding the anonymized data and the potential for re-identification creates a significant compliance risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough, risk-based assessment of the proposed data handling practices against the specific requirements of the relevant data privacy regulations. This involves engaging with legal and compliance experts to interpret the regulations in the context of the new technology and the specific data involved. It ensures that any data processing is conducted in a manner that genuinely protects patient privacy and adheres to legal obligations, such as obtaining appropriate consent or ensuring robust anonymization techniques that prevent re-identification. This proactive and diligent approach minimizes legal exposure and upholds ethical standards regarding patient data. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the launch based on a superficial understanding of anonymized data, assuming it automatically satisfies privacy requirements. This fails to acknowledge the nuances of data privacy laws, which often require more than just a label of anonymization. They demand demonstrable de-identification techniques that are effective against potential re-identification efforts. This approach risks violating data privacy regulations by inadequately protecting sensitive information. Another incorrect approach is to defer the decision solely to the marketing team without adequate legal or compliance oversight. This bypasses the critical due diligence required to ensure regulatory adherence. Marketing teams are primarily focused on commercial success, and without expert input, may overlook or underestimate the legal and ethical implications of data handling, leading to non-compliance. A third incorrect approach is to implement the data collection and processing as proposed, with the intention of addressing any potential compliance issues after the product is launched. This launch first, fix later strategy is highly risky. It demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and places the company in a position of potential liability, including significant fines and reputational damage, if non-compliance is discovered. It also undermines the principle of proactive compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the potential regulatory conflict and the specific regulations at play. Second, they should gather all relevant information about the proposed data handling practices and the data itself. Third, they must consult with internal or external legal and compliance experts to interpret the regulations and assess the risks. Fourth, they should explore alternative solutions that achieve the business objective while ensuring full compliance. Finally, they should document the entire process, including the rationale for the chosen course of action, to demonstrate due diligence. Question 18. Cost-benefit analysis shows that upgrading the clinical trial data management system could significantly reduce annual IT operational expenses. However, the proposed upgrade involves changes to the system's audit trail functionality and data archiving procedures. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and maintain data integrity under U.S. FDA regulations? Option A. Proceed with the system upgrade as planned, assuming the vendor's assurances of compliance are sufficient, and monitor for any immediate issues. Option B. Defer the system upgrade until a future date when a more comprehensive and less disruptive solution can be implemented, even if it means foregoing immediate cost savings. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and revalidation of the modified system to ensure continued compliance with 21 CFR Part 11 and other relevant FDA regulations before full implementation. Option D. Implement the cost-saving measures by reducing the scope of data security protocols and audit trail logging to align with the reduced budget. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and revalidation of the modified system to ensure continued compliance with 21 CFR Part 11 and other relevant FDA regulations before full implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between achieving business objectives, cost savings, and maintaining robust regulatory compliance and ethical standards. The pressure to implement cost-saving measures can create an environment where shortcuts are considered, potentially leading to a compromise of data integrity or patient safety, which are paramount in the pharmaceutical industry. The challenge lies in balancing financial prudence with unwavering adherence to regulatory mandates and ethical responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough, risk-based assessment of the proposed changes to the data management system. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and relevant U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA regulations, such as 21 CFR Part 11, which govern electronic records and signatures. A risk-based approach ensures that critical data integrity controls are maintained or enhanced, even when implementing cost-saving measures. This demonstrates a commitment to patient safety, data reliability, and regulatory compliance, which are foundational ethical and legal obligations for Johnson & Johnson. It involves a proactive identification of potential risks and the implementation of appropriate mitigation strategies, ensuring that any changes do not negatively impact the quality or security of clinical trial data. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the system upgrade without a comprehensive validation or revalidation process for the modified data management system. This would be a direct violation of FDA regulations, particularly those pertaining to the validation of computer systems used in regulated activities, e.g., 21 CFR Part 11. Failure to validate can lead to unreliable data, compromised trial integrity, and significant regulatory penalties, including warning letters and product recalls. Ethically, it undermines the trust placed in the company to conduct research responsibly. Another incorrect approach is to implement the cost-saving measures by reducing the scope of data security protocols or audit trail functionalities. This directly contravenes the requirements for maintaining the integrity, accuracy, and security of electronic records as mandated by 21 CFR Part 11. Weakening these controls increases the risk of data manipulation, unauthorized access, and loss of data, which are critical failures in maintaining the scientific validity of clinical trials and protecting patient confidentiality. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on vendor assurances regarding the system's compliance without conducting independent verification and testing. While vendor expertise is valuable, regulatory bodies require the regulated entity, Johnson & Johnson, to ensure and document that their systems meet all applicable requirements. This independent verification is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and accountability. Relying solely on external assurances can lead to overlooking specific compliance gaps that are unique to the company's operational context and regulatory obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly defining the objective, e.g., cost savings and the proposed solution. 2. Identifying all relevant regulatory requirements and ethical principles. 3. Conducting a thorough risk assessment to understand potential impacts on data integrity, patient safety, and compliance. 4. Developing and evaluating mitigation strategies for identified risks. 5. Documenting the entire process, including the rationale for decisions and the implementation of controls. 6. Seeking input from relevant stakeholders, including regulatory affairs, quality assurance, and IT security. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly and ethically, with a steadfast commitment to regulatory compliance. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that a Johnson & Johnson product has exhibited a minor deviation from its expected performance during post-market surveillance. The deviation has not yet resulted in any reported adverse events, but it raises a question about potential compliance with specific product quality standards. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the responsible Johnson & Johnson team? Option A. Immediately submit a voluntary report to the relevant regulatory authority detailing the observed deviation, citing the potential for future adverse events. Option B. Consult with external legal counsel to determine if the deviation warrants any disclosure without first conducting an internal assessment. Option C. Classify the deviation as insignificant and monitor it without further immediate action, assuming it will resolve itself. Option D. Initiate a formal investigation to thoroughly assess the nature, root cause, and potential impact of the deviation against all applicable regulatory requirements and internal quality standards, documenting all findings and decisions. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal investigation to thoroughly assess the nature, root cause, and potential impact of the deviation against all applicable regulatory requirements and internal quality standards, documenting all findings and decisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to quickly address a potential product issue and the imperative to adhere to strict regulatory reporting timelines and procedures. The pressure to act swiftly can lead to overlooking critical compliance steps, potentially resulting in significant penalties and reputational damage. The ambiguity of whether the observed issue constitutes a reportable event under the relevant regulations necessitates careful judgment and a thorough understanding of the regulatory definitions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of evaluating the observed issue against the specific reporting criteria outlined in the relevant regulatory framework. This includes consulting internal subject matter experts, reviewing product specifications and historical data, and if necessary, seeking clarification from regulatory authorities. This methodical approach ensures that any reporting decision is based on a comprehensive assessment of the facts and regulatory requirements, thereby upholding compliance and demonstrating due diligence. It aligns with the ethical obligation to act with integrity and transparency in all dealings with regulatory bodies. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately reporting the issue without a thorough investigation. This could lead to unnecessary regulatory scrutiny, wasted resources for both the company and the regulatory agency, and potentially damage the company's credibility if the issue is later found to be non-reportable. It fails to demonstrate a responsible and informed approach to regulatory obligations. Another incorrect approach is to delay reporting based on an informal assessment or personal judgment that the issue is minor. This carries the risk of violating reporting timelines if the issue is indeed reportable, leading to potential fines and sanctions. It also bypasses the established internal procedures for evaluating and escalating potential compliance matters, which is a failure of internal controls and ethical responsibility. A third incorrect approach is to consult only external legal counsel without engaging internal quality assurance or regulatory affairs teams. While legal advice is crucial, it should be integrated with internal expertise to ensure a complete understanding of the product, manufacturing processes, and the nuances of the regulatory landscape. Relying solely on external advice might lead to a report that lacks critical technical context or fails to consider internal operational realities. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the observed event or concern, 2. Consulting the relevant regulatory guidelines and internal policies, 3. Engaging appropriate internal subject matter experts, e.g., quality, regulatory affairs, medical affairs, 4. Documenting all assessments, consultations, and decisions, 5. If there is any doubt about reportability, erring on the side of caution and seeking clarification from regulatory authorities or escalating internally for a definitive decision. This process ensures a compliant, ethical, and defensible outcome. Question 20. The control framework reveals that a new drug formulation has undergone preliminary efficacy testing, but the full validation of its manufacturing process is still in its early stages. The marketing department is pushing for an accelerated launch to capture market share from a competitor. Which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical responsibilities? Option A. Expedite the remaining validation steps by using less stringent testing protocols to meet the marketing deadline. Option B. Proceed with the launch, documenting the ongoing validation process and committing to post-market surveillance to address any emergent issues. Option C. Launch the product with a disclaimer acknowledging the incomplete validation, shifting the burden of risk to the consumer. Option D. Halt the launch until the manufacturing process validation is fully completed and all quality control parameters are confirmed to be within established specifications. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the launch, documenting the ongoing validation process and committing to post-market surveillance to address any emergent issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the desire to innovate and the imperative to maintain robust regulatory compliance. The pressure to quickly bring a new product to market, especially in the pharmaceutical industry where patient safety is paramount, can create a temptation to bypass or expedite certain compliance steps. Careful judgment is required to balance speed with the non-negotiable need for thorough risk assessment and validation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory adherence above all else. By conducting a comprehensive risk assessment and ensuring all necessary quality control measures are in place before product launch, the company upholds its ethical obligations and complies with the stringent requirements of regulatory bodies like the FDA, assuming U.S. jurisdiction for this exam. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of product recalls, adverse events, and subsequent legal or reputational damage. It aligns with the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, and the overall regulatory framework designed to protect public health. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on expediting the launch without adequate risk assessment would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to the release of a product with unforeseen safety issues, directly violating the core mandate of regulatory bodies to ensure product efficacy and safety. Such an action would breach the company's duty of care to its customers and could result in severe penalties, including fines, product bans, and criminal charges. Another incorrect approach, such as relying on outdated validation protocols for a novel product, would fail to address the unique risks associated with new technologies or formulations, thereby creating a compliance gap and exposing the company to regulatory scrutiny and potential harm to patients. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory requirements. This involves identifying all relevant laws, guidelines, and internal policies. Next, a thorough risk assessment should be conducted, considering all potential hazards and their likelihood and impact. This assessment should inform the development of appropriate control measures and validation strategies. Finally, a robust documentation and review process, involving cross-functional teams and independent quality assurance, is essential to ensure that all compliance obligations are met before proceeding with product launch. This systematic approach fosters a culture of compliance and responsible innovation.